tendency to leave a ripple of your life's effect is to pour your life, your spiritual DNA, your spiritual genetics into the women who are in this next generation. In our church, we need some strong spiritual moms to help us to get a picture of that. I want to take us to like a small book in the New Testament, a book that's maybe not often referred to, but it's a book called Titus. And I want to just kind of set the context for you there. The Apostle Paul, he's planted a church on the island of Crete, and he's now gone, and he's left behind this pastor named Titus. And Titus's job is to help the church get established and get on the right track. Now, remember that Christianity is fairly new on the island. And people didn't have this long history of church life or growing up in a Christian home like a lot of us do here this morning. The church had been affected by some problems and some struggles. Well, Paul could have written about a lot of different ways to help this church get healthy, to come out of these problems, to come out of these struggles. But I want you to notice his strategy in Titus chapter 2, and beginning at verse 3, he says, "The older women likewise, that they be reverent in behavior." Now I want to just refer back to verse 2 because he says likewise, because in verse 2 he's talking to the men, and he was telling them, be sober, reverent, temperate, sound in faith, in love, and patience. But he says, the older women likewise, so they're supposed to be doing that as well, that they be reverent in behavior, not slanderers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things, that they admonish the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. So I've been married a long time, 33 years, so I've been married long enough to know that when a lot of women read a passage like this, their first question is, at what age do you become an older woman? Well, I'll tell you, you're in the age of being an older woman if you're 1 year older than my wife Michelle and on up. That's older, okay? So anybody that's 28 and over, I guess you can be considered older this morning, right? Well, Paul doesn't give us the specifics about that, but he does say those of you who are more mature, you've been at this a little bit longer. It's your responsibility to help train the next generation of women. And I want to share with you just two simple observations from the text that I think become a good framework for us to talk about how we do that. And the first observation is this: it's how you live matters. Paul begins with the older women, and he tells Titus to teach them to be godly. You know what jumps out at me at the very first thing in this passage? It's that the older women are not marginalized. They weren't yesterday's news. The older women weren't just sitting on the sidelines in early spiritual retirement. They were fulfilling a very important role in the life of the church. In fact, Paul says if the church is going to be healthy, that this is what has to take place. These women have to set the example. These women have to pour their life into the younger generation. And more as a pastor, I hear younger women saying things like, is there an older woman whose life I can watch and I can observe? Is there an older woman who will come alongside me and be a friend and an encourager and a mentor and someone who will walk alongside me in this journey called life? So Paul says, Titus, I want you to find the older women in your church, and then I want you to challenge them to live in this way so that they live a life that's worthy of emulating. And I want to walk through these very quickly, but there are basically 5 challenges that Paul gives through Titus to these older women. And first, he says to remain teachable. He said, again in verse 2, that the older men be sober, reverent, temperate, sound in faith and love and patience, and that the older women likewise. So he says to these older women, are you still growing? Are you still learning? Are you still pursuing God? Or in recent days and years, have you just sort of begun to coast in your spiritual life? He says, I hope that you're still exemplifying these characteristics. I hope that you're still teachable. I hope that you're still exemplifying the character of Christ. Secondly, he says, watch your lifestyle, because he says, be reverent in behavior. He says, Titus, I want you to teach these older women to live in a way that is appropriate. So is your lifestyle honoring to God? Because here's the reality, and this isn't a news flash, this isn't something that's new, but it's the reality of things, is that people are watching you. They're observing your life. And just because your kids are grown and gone doesn't mean that your job is through. There are lots of young women in our church who need a role model of someone that they can watch up close and personal, who will model for them what the Christian life looks like. Paul said to a young Timothy, a young pastor, 1 Timothy 4:16, he said, "Take heed to yourself and to the doctrine, continue in them. For in doing this you will save both yourself and those who hear you." So remain teachable, watch your lifestyle, and stay active in serving God. Be a teacher of good things. So there's an implied assumption in Paul's teaching here, and the implied assumption is that these older women are engaged in service. They're engaged in serving. Now, I'm going to retire someday from pastoring as soon as the Lord puts me in a position to retire, but I won't ever stop serving God. You guys are serving the Lord. In fact, if you still have a pulse, if you have a heartbeat, if you're still taking a breath, God has you here for a reason, and that reason is so that you can continue to serve Him. And this is especially important for some of you who are a little bit further along in life, because now you actually have more time to serve God than maybe you did at another time. You're at a season of life, either that your career is winding down or your kids are grown and gone, and you actually have more time now to invest in these things that matter for eternity. What a tragic thing it is that just the time when a woman has the right experience, enough wisdom and time to pass it on, that she chooses to sit on the sidelines. So Paul says, stay active in serving God. And how do you stay active? Well, it looks different for everybody. Every one of you, it's different for each and every one of you. But stay active in serving the Lord. Practice, and then he goes on to say practice self-control, because he mentions that women are not to be slanderers, not slanderers. So he said these older women should have a lifestyle that's appropriate and doesn't speak evil of other people. They're not gossips. They're not slanderers. They don't spew out negative things. They don't spew out criticisms or complaints. I love some of our older women around here that when you see them on the weekend, they're full of life. They're vibrant. They're joyful. They have a great positive word to say. And you can tell they're excited to be here, and they just spread joy wherever they go, and they really live out the words that are found in Colossians 4 and 6, where it says, "Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one." So what a great word for all of us. Now next, Paul instructs to beware of inappropriate behavior. And what Paul's doing here is he's getting at a larger principle. And the larger principle is this: don't let there be anything in your life that can be a stumbling block to someone watching you. Is there anything that you're doing or that you embrace that you say, I wouldn't want someone else knowing about that or watching it or modeling that after me? You know, you don't want to be a stumbling block to somebody. Some people, that answers the question, am I my brother's keeper, right? Right? So be careful about that. Paul said this in 1 Thessalonians 5, abstain from every form of evil. But I want you to know something. It isn't enough just to be a godly example. In fact, there's something that Paul says that matters even more, and it's the second observation. And that is this, that who you pass it on to matters most. So it's not enough to just possess these qualities if you don't pass them on. There's lots of things that you all know that you can pass on to someone else's next generation. So you've got to be intentional to do that. And so Paul, again, talking to Timothy about his rich heritage in 2 Timothy 1 and 5, he says, when I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I'm persuaded is in you also. So Timothy, he's saying, Timothy, as I've watched your life, it's obvious to me that what was in your grandmother got passed on down to your mother, and now those same spiritual values are living in you. And Timothy, you've had a great model to watch in your own family. So it's something that you can pass on to the next generation and the next generation. All of us need truth to live by. We need principles to guide our lives by. But more than that, we need people who will give us a picture of what that truth is all about. Right? It's one thing to teach and to say things, but model those things, and then choose somebody and help them to discover all of these things. We need someone who will believe in us and stand by us and guide us and encourage us and model what it means to live the Christian life. Not just to know what they know, but to become what they are. Basically what I'm talking about is being a mentor and mentoring someone and pouring your life into them, and so that they can continue on the things that you have learned, the things that you have discovered, the things that you have life experience. A lot of times, young people will ask me, well, how do you know that? And I'll say, well, that's life experience. I learned that because I made a mistake a long time ago, and it hurt me pretty bad, and now I know not to do that anymore, right? That's like when you're hammering a nail. You know how to hold the hammer, right? Because if you don't hold it a certain way, you could do a lot of damage with that thing, right? So we learn from life. And so you all sitting here this morning and our women that are here this morning, you have experienced so many things that you could pass on to the next generation. And I'm talking about all kinds of things that you could do. You talk about even recipes that you have, right? Things that you do. I'd like a certain recipe to be passed down to me. It's called Italian cream cake that Sister Wanda makes sometimes, and I'd like to know how to make that thing, or at least tell Michelle how to make it. But you got to pass along that stuff. It gets lost. Who's going to make the Italian cream cake, right, if the recipe's gone? Anyway, I'm trying to make a point here is that you all have valuable information that you can give to the next generation. You can pass that along to somebody, and then they can take it on to the next generation, and it keeps going on and on and on. And that's what he's talking about here in this lineage here with his grandmother and his mother and himself. But it's a passing on of this relationship that they had with God. And so you have a relationship with God. And you can pass that relationship on and that experience that you've had and all of those things that the Lord... There's many of you here this morning, you have faced so many different things. Some of you have faced tragedy. You have faced tragedies in your life. And here you are. You're still standing and you're still in church and you're still worshiping the Lord. But you've gone through those tragedies. And there may be somebody that you can talk to about how your feelings were. I want to be very gentle with this, but I know there's some of you that have lost children. And you know the pain of that. And you felt the suffering of that. And it's still with you even today. And you can share that with somebody else that's younger than you. And you can tell them what you did and how you continue to this day to continue on. So we need somebody like that. We need somebody not to just know what we know, but to become what we are. And we do that by modeling them. And I want to take just a moment and address those of you moms who are here in the room who your kids are still at home. I just want to challenge you again to say the spiritual training of your children is in your hands. And I like the fact that Patty has already kind of touched on this morning, but you still have them at home. And the spiritual training of your children is in your hands. And it's in the hands of your partner, your husband. It's your job. God placed us as a stewardship into your lives, the precious lives of your children, and the spiritual training belongs to you. Now, often, we get so concerned about getting a good education and athletic skills and getting the right kind of job for our kids so that they can succeed in life that we often neglect the spiritual training that they need. And you say, well, what about all that ministry that's going on up at the church? Can I just drop them off and let them go to children's church and let them go to Sunday school and let them go on Wednesday nights and just all that ministry, that children's ministry and all that's going on up there? Well, the children's ministry that we have and the high school programs are meant to supplement to what you are doing. It is not a substitute for a mom or a dad or a grandparent. I mean, if a grandparent's raising a child, you have that responsibility. It's a responsibility. When we call families up here and we dedicate the child, and we're dedicating the child to the Lord, that is not really a ceremony for that child. It is a ceremony for those parents and those grandparents who are making a commitment to God, saying, I'm going to raise this child in a godly home, and I'm going to pour my life into them. Yes, I'm going to bring them to church, but I'm going to teach them the ways of the Lord. And so it's important for you to do that. It's important for you to understand that, what an influence that you have in their lives. So I guess that's the reality that we have to face. But let's go back and think of a moment in your life. If you want to prove that point, think for a moment back through your life. What is it that has had the most profound impact on the spiritual direction of your life? So if you take a moment to think about that, if you were to think or take a survey, I'll tell you what would not be at the top of the list. It would not be a sermon. Okay, as hard as that is painful for me, because I prepare every week to bring you a sermon from the Lord. But it would not be a sermon. It wouldn't be a seminar. It may not be a song. But you know what it would be? It would be a person. You would have at the top of the list that had an impact upon your life. Mom, dad, aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, a friend, someone impacted your life. It'd be somebody who, by watching their life and being involved in their life and being up close and personal in their life, that they influenced you. And so, ladies, I want to say to you, you're way ahead of us in this category of building relationships. Because God wired it in you where it's a little bit easier for you to open up and to initiate relationships, right? And go a little bit deeper. I mean, women are connected to each other that a lot of times they don't go to the restroom by themselves. There'll be a group of them that go to the restroom together. You ever seen that happen before? It's relationships. They're relational, right? And so the men, we're just a little bit slower than that. It's like the fellow who on a Saturday morning, he told his wife that he would take the kids and take them down to the park and let them play on some of the playground equipment. And he went down to the park. He got his newspaper, got his coffee, headed down to the park. And the kids are playing on the equipment. It's a great day. He opens up his newspaper and he's starting to read, but sitting on a bench close by to him are two women. And these two women are talking 90 miles an hour. And it was hard for him to read his paper while they're just chattering the whole time. And in fact, the longer that they talked, the more distracted that he became. And eventually he found himself being totally engrossed in their conversation. You ever been there? It's hard for me, I tell you, when I'm in a big crowd, especially at a restaurant, and I'm even sitting across from this beautiful woman. If somebody's talking, my ears start listening to somebody else's conversation. So you better be careful what you say around me. I might be listening. But anyway, right? They're sitting on the bench. They're talking 90 miles an hour. And so it's hard for him to pay attention. So the longer that they began to talk, the more distracted he became, and eventually found himself just totally engrossed in their conversation. So he's sitting there with the newspaper up as if he's reading it, but actually he's eavesdropping on their conversation. And he's blown away that these two women are sitting out in a public place. They're in a park. And man, they're just sharing the depth of their lives and with all these different things going on. And they're sharing intimate details about their family life and their problems and their struggles in the past. But the thing that blew him away the most was when one of them got up and she said, well, it was great meeting you today. And then she just walked off. That was something, I know some of you women do that. You meet somebody and sometimes you just click and you just start sharing things with people. And so really, women, you have an advantage to men, because I want to tell you something. That's not going to happen with a group of men. We're not going to sit there and tell everything we know about ourselves. Right? So what we're talking about in this whole spiritual mothering idea is about a relationship that you women can have with the younger generation, that you can have those one-on-one conversations like that and talk about in-depth details, and you can pour yourself into them, and you can share those things that you've gone through. And so it's a relationship. It's not a program. It's about passing on your life and your experiences. And that's the curriculum that you're teaching. So often in America, we get hung up on these educational models and think that if we don't have a classroom and we don't have a workbook and we don't have this time that's set aside, that we really can't teach anybody anything. But that's not true. All right? I want you to think back to when you taught your kids how to brush their teeth. You know what I'm sure you didn't do? You didn't sit them down and have a history study about toothbrushes and where they come from. You didn't do a word study on cavities. You just got a toothbrush and you put it in their hand and you held their hand and you showed them how to put the toothpaste on it and you showed them how to do the motion of up and down or round and round, or you sang the Barney song, I don't let the water run, 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 right? And you didn't want them letting the water run, turn the water on, get it wet, turn it off, whatever. You were showing them how to do it, right? So you showed them. Well, there are a lot of young men and there are a lot of young women in our culture who just need some people who will show them how to do life, how to have a good marriage, how to be ethical in their business, how to be a person who cares about others, how to walk through a time of crisis, how to walk through a time of struggle. They need somebody to show them. And I've discovered that people aren't very good about taking orders, but they're pretty good about imitating somebody. And you can impress people from a distance, but you'll only impact them by being up close and personal. And how that looks is going to be different from woman to woman. How that looks is going to be different. It's not going to be the same for everybody. But I want us to be very clear about this. Is Paul's command that the older women invest in the younger women. That's the command. And what he tells them, what is it that he's telling them to pass on? You can summarize this curriculum in one word, and it's the word love. He says, I want you to teach them how to love their husbands, love kids, lovingly care for their homes. And there's this great verse in Isaiah 49, and it asks the question, can a woman forget her nursing child and not have compassion on the son of her womb? And when God was looking for a picture to show His undying love for us, the best word picture He could use is the love of a mother for her child. And ladies, you know how to love so deeply. You know how to love so unconditionally. Now, you will hold people accountable. I know you will. But you will love them, and it may be tough love sometimes. But in the DNA of what it means to be a mom is unconditional love. And ladies, there are many young women who need an older woman who will come alongside them and say to them, I don't have an agenda. I'm not looking for anything from you. I just want to come alongside you, and I want to be your friend, and I want to be an encouragement to you. And again, because God has wired each of us and shaped us differently, how we live that out will look differently. But when Moses was talking about how to pass truth on, he wrote this in Deuteronomy, and it says, you shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk to them when they sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and shall be as a frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And that's what he was telling them and teaching the law. This is what you're going to do. You're going to walk with them, and as you're walking along the path, you're going to have a conversation about it, and you're going to talk to them about it. Before they go to bed at night, you're going to tell them a little story about it. When they get up in the morning, you're going to talk about it. You're going to talk to them. It's relational. It's talking to them. It's having a conversation back and forth, and that's what he's saying. You're going to sit in your house. You're going to talk to your children. You're going to diligently teach them. Well, as I close this morning, some of you might say, well, I could do that, but where do I start? Well, first off, I would say that to many of you, God has probably already put somebody in your life and right now even laid them on your heart and mind for you to approach. And I would encourage you to go after that and initiate that relationship, because the junior high girls need you, the high school girls need you, the college-age women need you, and even the women who are married and have families need you and would be willing to invest in them and spend time with them and teach them how to be godly women. They can learn from you. You don't need to be perfect. They can learn from your mistakes as well as your successes. They just want you to love them and teach them about life. They don't always act and talk like they need you in their lives, but they really do. So initiate a conversation. Go invite them to lunch. You don't think they'll go? They'll go if you pay for the bill. They'll go. You invite them to lunch. You may be the only godly influence that some of them will see up close. Right? You can make a huge impact on the world of one young woman, and in doing that, you may change the world. You know, often, I know Billy Graham is not a mother, he was a father. But Billy Graham was a prophet to the world, to the nations, man. He served God and he served the world. And I still listen to Billy Graham, even though he's gone. I listen to his messages. But you know, the person that we don't hear a lot about was Mordecai Ham. And that's where Billy Graham came to know the Lord. Mordecai Ham was preaching, he was an evangelist. And Billy Graham came to the Lord through that. And that one influence, he would always point back to Mordecai Ham. You could be that Mordecai Ham. You could be that woman or that man that could change a generation, could change the world by pouring yourself into someone else, teaching them the ways of the Lord. Right? You can do that. You can have an impact on the world. Well, maybe you're here today and you're the younger woman and you're saying, well, what about me? Well, I'd say go find an older woman. Find an older woman. Find someone who could walk alongside you in this thing called life. Well, as you look back at the passage in Titus, at the end of the passage, Paul says that the word of God may not be blasphemed. So he's instructing them. He's telling Titus, have the women teach the younger girls all of these things so that the word of God may not be blasphemed. Another way to say that is, then they won't bring shame on the word of God. Because there's a lot at stake here. And I know some of you are sitting there right now and the feeling that's in your heart is that you don't understand. You don't understand, Brother John. I've never had that kind of role model in my life. I don't know what a healthy mom relationship looks like. And the good news is you can break the cycle. You can break the cycle in your family so that in the succeeding generations, it's not about dysfunction or being unhealthy or brokenness, but rather it's a spiritually healthy family. In Exodus 20, verse 5, it says, "You shall not bow down to them nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and the fourth generations of those who hate me." But listen, he says, "But showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments." The fact is, when we sway and when we drift, it has consequences on our children and sometimes on our grandchildren and succeeding generations. But you get to verse 6 there, and he says, "But showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments." And that's a great verse. See, today, if you'll begin to break the cycle of brokenness and dysfunction, generations from now, people will look back in your family and they'll be able to say, it was back then that our family started to get healthy when we started to get on track. My heritage I owe back to that decision that she made many years ago at that altar. You know, I'm thankful for the heritage that I have, that someone way back made the right decision to obey God and follow Him. And here I stand today because of the generations that were before me. I stand as a pastor today because of the generations that were before me. This church is here because of the generations that were before us. Maryville Church of God. Brother and Sister Laws saw a need in a community and they dug this thing out, and there was many things that they had to endure along the way, but they poured their life into this ministry and they poured their life into people, and here the church still stands today. We're standing on the shoulders of great men and women of God and are able to do ministry and to be successful today because of what previous generations did so that this generation could continue on. And I want to tell you today, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility. If we want Radiant Life to continue on the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, we've got to pour into the next generation. And women, we need you to say, I'll come alongside that younger generation and I will pour my life into them so that when I'm gone, ministry will continue. So that what I know will continue to be passed along to the next generation. If you're here this morning and if you're able, ladies, I'd like for you to come and stand in this altar, and I want to say a prayer over you today. And if you're willing to commit your life to pouring into the next generation, I want you to come and stand in this altar. If you're willing to be a mentor, if you're willing to be able to have an impact for the Lord, I want you to come and stand in this altar. I'm going to pray. If you're unable to come, I understand. Some of you physically cannot come up here because of different things that are going on in your bodies. I understand that. But for those that can, I want to say a prayer for you today and pray over you. And I want you to know how important you are to this body, how important you are to this church. You're so important for the success of what's happening at Radiant Life. And so I'm thankful for you here today. And I want to pray for you. And so I want you just to bow your heads, and I want you just to offer, say, Lord, here am I. You can use me. Do whatever you want to do, God. I want to be a willing vessel to you. Just pray as I pray over you today. And Father, we thank you.